Welcome to the Coaching Focus podcast. Today I'm joined by Mia Gia. Mia believes in the human mind's ability to reach insight and clarity. Her coaching style explores limited thinking, barriers or assumptions to enable a path forward. Curious and passionate about people, Mia has a 28-year career in human resources, specialising in transformation and change, talent management and diversity and inclusion. Mia holds a chartered status of CIPD, an MBA with the Open University and a professional certificate in coaching practice from Henley Business School. Welcome, Mia. It's an absolute pleasure to have you as a guest, and I look forward to discussing today's topic of supporting middle-aged women.
Thank you very much for having me.
So if we may start off with the first question, which is sort of I'm curious about, is what do you class as middle-aged?
That's a great question, and I'm not sure I want to pin myself down to an actual
go on, please.
How about this? I'm 48 years old and I consider myself as middle-aged. But when I think about middle-aged, I think of it more as a life stage. So when I think about myself as a middle-aged woman or people that I know, coach and support, it's women who might be in the top job or aspiring and close to being in the top job in leadership. It's women who've got multiple priorities, more so than they had before. So if they have children, for example, they may be dealing with the teenage years, the tween and teenage years, shall we say, or if their children are slightly older, they might be leaving home to go to university. They may have aging parents or loved ones that require their support, and they may be finding they're in every different part of their life. They're being looked to for all the answers, and no one has all the answers, do they? So that creates a lot of stress. And interestingly, I saw on, there's an Instagram I follow called the Latte Lounge, which is great for middle-aged women. And they referred to us as the sandwich generation, which I really like because I think it comes from all angles. And that was such a nice analogy. So that's what I consider middle-aged to be.
Well, I think that's a great answer. And I guess what I'm picking up from you, Mia, is there's a lot of bits that are changing for people in that sandwich period, if I may use your term.
Yes, I think there is. And, you know, we're at a stage in life where our own health starts to become a problem as well. So it might not be just aging relatives, but it might be ourselves, it might be our friends. If we're looking at the general age ranges, starting to come across perimenopause or menopause, which can be really very challenging health-wise, both physically. So there are so many physical symptoms, but one that always jumps out at me because it reminds me of when I had my baby is sleep deprivation, sleep disruption, and how desperately difficult it is to function with sleep deprivation, but also mental symptoms, anxiety that perhaps you might not be used to dealing with before and wondering where that's coming from, or real concerns around confidence that you perhaps maybe you didn't have that before. There can also be issues with brain fog. So I know I've been in meetings where I've been sat there racking my brains trying to remember if I said I would do something for it. I'm sure I'm not the only one that's been in that position. So yes, you know, it's an interesting time.
So what I'm hearing then is that there's a lot of things changing around them, with children, with parents, with work, etc. But at the same time, on a personal change, some middle-aged women may well be going through menopause as well.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah. Okay. And just so our listeners are really clear, I think you've mentioned all of them, but just clarify, what are some of the symptoms of menopause? Just some of the common symptoms.
There's many symptoms, and it's different for everybody. But if we look at them in kind of two areas, there are possible physical symptoms can be things like night sweats, which may happen and cause sleep deprivation, as I mentioned before. Hot flushes can be a common symptom as well, which can be very, very difficult for women in well, anywhere, but if we're talking about women in the workplace, they can come from nowhere and there's nothing you can do about them. So imagine somebody at work who has to wear a very heavy uniform, for example, or being in an organization where there isn't open dialogue about these challenges, or where where women don't feel, frankly, psychologically safe to raise concerns and talk about these things. And guess what, that can mean absenteeism, that can mean resignation, that can mean talent walking out of your door because women are embarrassed and nobody talks about it. I think that's changing, by the way. And then on the side of the mental symptoms, so brain fog, I mean, just not remembering things, or your memory just not being as good as it was before. And part of that's having loads of other things going on too. Being a working parent, any working parent understands that, but I think at this stage there is a risk that can get a little worse. Anxiety can develop, that's not uncommon. Depression, sometimes that's not uncommon. Sometimes you hear stories that women are diagnosed with things like this and medicated for them when perhaps that wasn't quite what was needed. So there's a lot of uncertainty out there. And I think sometimes that can really risk a way a woman feels about her own identity, because all of a sudden she may not recognize herself.
Yeah, so fascinating. So you mentioned things are changing, which is great news. What are further things that organizations or leaders can consider to facilitate that change and make it, as you said, sort of more open and understanding from everyone within an organization?
Yes, and that's the absolute key, what you just said, actually. It's everyone in the organization. So I think the best thing to do is just be open in dialogue about challenges of menopause. It's an education piece. So training your people, or creating a webinar for your people to understand what the challenges are. And, I really feel that menopause is everyone's business, because if you're not a middle-aged woman, you might soon be a middle-aged woman. You might not even identify as a woman, but be suffering menopause, which is even harder to talk about, to get help from. You might be married to or partner of a woman. It might be your mum, your sister. It might be the person you manage. It might be the person you're managed by. It touches everybody in some way. Just have that understanding, just to, be open about concerns that any employee had, really. Creating that environment where it's safe to speak out and ask for help is exactly where we should be heading. And I think some organizations are heading that way. I think we are all heading that way. There's definitely work to do, but just raising the profile of something that, frankly, impacts half the population.
And what I'm picking up there is the main theme here is about educating people on what it is and the symptoms of it, and the impacts that it has on an individual within the workplace and their ability to work.
Yes. So it might be as simple as paying for somebody to have a desk fan with no questions asked. It might be, oh, that uniform, you've only got one set, I'm going to give you another set. So that makes you feel comfortable that you've got a spare blouse, whatever it might be. It might be somebody has a tricky appointment they have to go to, and just allowing them the time for that. Having a menopause policy in place that states, your intention to support women in the workplace, and perhaps giving them access to specialist medical care. Menopause clinics, for example, are in existence, and that can get women the expert help they need. Because I hear out there, there wasn't always the training for menopause for the doctors, so they weren't enabled. So some people know more than others, and to go to a specialist feels a bit more comfortable. So it's that kind of thing.
So Mia, you've spoken about what organisations are doing, and one thing is obviously putting a policy in place. The other is some very practical elements that organisations can do for those individuals. I'd like to talk into when you coach middle-aged women, what are some of those conversations that come up and some of the challenges that middle-aged women are facing, whether that's with menopause or with other areas?
Yes, I mean, I think coaching is an amazing support for middle-aged women. I really do. I have a coach myself, so I absolutely put my money where my mouth is on that. I think in general, just having the opportunity to get off the merry-go-round just for a minute. And I think sometimes people go so fast, they're too scared to stop. And coaching just enables you to stop and think, when was the last time you did that? And equally as important as having the space to think is being heard in a way that you're not heard anywhere else, because a good coach will be present with you every step of the way. They will be listening to hear you rather than thinking about what they're going to say next. There's no judgment. There's no judgment at all. So it's a safe space outlet to just sort out whatever might be going on in your mind. And that's a more general look at your question. But if I were to look at examples of what some of those things might be, it could be things like managing priorities. I mean, I don't know about you, but I'm seeing more manage your energy rather than manage your time. And I really like that, because I know if I had a project that was really important to work on, I would do it after I'd walked the dog and had a coffee. That's when I'm at my best, and that's in the morning. And for other people, that might be a different time. So just helping somebody figure out, how can I work at my optimum with all of these things going on, with that whole system that I talked about before? Because, whether a woman is in employment or not, in leadership or not, their life is a system of things, and you've got to coach that whole system, that person with all the things that are going on. So it might be that, it might be that they want to figure out what's important to them. They're at that stage, as I mentioned before, the kids are coming into the teenage years, or they're leaving home, and all of a sudden you're thinking, oh, wow, I'm halfway through my life. What next? You spend life focusing on the settling down, the getting somewhere to live, those typical things. And then you think, crumbs, hopefully we're all living longer now, and what next for the decades to come? And you've lost yourself. So coaching can be really good at helping somebody get back to that inner compass and just think about what is it that you want from your life, and explore those areas. And it's a real investment in yourself. And there's a lot being said out there about self-care not being selfish, but we're not that good at believing that in my generation. And I hope my daughter, I've got a 12-and-a-half-year-old daughter, and I hope she will be better at it than we are. And I think, the younger people coming through are getting this. But just how you resource yourself.
Sure.
Coaching can help around that. I've seen several times, I'm sure you've heard it a million times, but it is my favorite analogy. No one leaves their phone low on charge, ever. But you'd quite happily go to work feeling absolutely spent. It's ridiculous. It is ridiculous. So
It's interesting because I've not heard that quote, but I love it. I think it's, yeah, no, it's the first time I've heard it. So it's a very simple analogy that
yeah,
you're right. Everyone, well, I charge my phone up every night, so I've got it throughout the day. But and I'm hoping by sleeping and eating well and resting well that I charge myself up. But weekends I probably don't, or in the week I probably don't properly.
mm,
Um, so what I hear you saying is, with the coaching, is providing that psychological safety, that safe space
yes,
that some people won't get within an organization always, and just having time to, in my words, but offload, to discuss things
yeah,
that you don't feel comfortable in discussing within the workplace. Um, Whether that's to do with the children, whether that's to do with work projects, whether that's to do with challenges you're personally facing or issues that you're going through. So that's what you see the coaching providing. Great.
and other things around the confidence piece, which we talked about before. Imposter syndrome is very real and alive and well in all of us. And good coaching conversations can really support people work through whatever those limiting beliefs are around those feelings.
Yeah. And what is, when you're working with someone in that space and in that environment and they're coming to you to recharge, what are some of the common topics that will show themselves with middle-aged women?
There's a lot around self-care and balance, what I want from life, other priorities.
Yeah.
That's really interesting to me. And I think in general, a lot of coaching comes down to confidence in some form, whether it's a confidence to make a decision, or a more obvious confidence concern. But I think there's a lot around confidence and imposter syndrome, and just how they present to the outside world.
Mm, mm. So it's helping them present themselves more confidently, more
Yes,
authentically,
yes,
and being, I guess, in a place where they can be kind to themselves and keep themselves energized, if I'm
yes.
using the phone analogy.
That's exactly it. I liked what you said there about presenting authentically, because it is coming back and figuring out, who am I? Am I still on track for who that is?
Mm,
Is there more I can do? Guess what? You get to this age and there's actually more you can give back to that perhaps you couldn't do in your earlier years. And that
yeah,
starts to become a value, a factor, particularly in my case. I'll give myself as an example. My daughter's 12 and a half. I want to pave the way and do what I can to support women so that when she's my age, things are different.
yeah. Well, I have two daughters, 21 and 23, and like you, I want to pave the way to create a world where they feel equal, and there's equity,
Yeah,
and they can bring, like everybody should be able to bring their best selves to the workplace and into society,
yeah.
and feel comfortable and confident in doing that.
Yeah, so bringing their whole self to work, as we say, when we think about inclusion, not hiding anything or leaving anything behind.
So, with the coaches that are listening, Mia, what are some of the tips or models or frameworks which you find yourself using more often than not?
Well, obviously it depends on the conversation, but I quite like the wheel of life.
Okay.
So the model where somebody's working out the key areas in their life for
Yeah.
anybody who's not familiar with it. And then it's a self-assessment piece on, if I were to rate myself between 1 and 10 on how I felt about, I don't know, let's say self-care, that's a great example, on my
Yeah.
self-care, and all the other things that I choose. Maybe there's 6, maybe there's 8 things. And then you really you plot it for a visual, which can be really powerful to look at. And that then sparks a conversation around, oh, you you rated your self-care a 4. What would make that 5? Why isn't that 3? You know, how do we get it to a 7? You know, and you start to form a really broad conversation from somebody. So that can be a nice one to use. But of course, it depends on whether that's appropriate or not, as coaches listening would know.
Yeah. And like you, I love that tool. Is very simple, bringing in scaling, you know, not only understanding where they are, but where they'd like it to be, and helping them to develop, or them to come up with the solutions to find that way forward. Yeah.
Yes, yeah, and prioritize them.
Prioritize. Yeah, great. And you talk a lot about self-care, and you use the analogy, which I really do love, about the telephone, and you know, when your mobile phone that you charge up, you very rarely constantly charge yourself up. So give our listeners some sort of understanding about what self-care looks like and activities that they could do to charge themselves up, that they could own themselves.
That's a great question. I think there may be slight differences per person because it depends on what nourishes you as an individual, if you like. The obvious ones for me would be, I always say to people, not necessarily my coaching clients, but just in general, if I'm chit-chatting about these things, because I'm really passionate about it, you know, classics for me: drink more water, wear sunscreen, get enough sleep, breathe properly, because not many of us do that. It's interesting. And the obvious ones are exercise, of course, and nutrition. But if exercise is daunting, which to some people it can be, you know, walking is really underrated in my opinion. Just getting out in nature makes a huge difference to the way I feel. It really does. So I think that's a very powerful thing that we can all do. We can all step outside our front door, even if it's only 10 minutes.
And those things are very simple to achieve, right? Just drink water. It's free to everybody. Yeah. To sleep well, you know, we choose most of the time when we can go to sleep. Eat well, and do exercise, walking or whatever. And you know, most of us hopefully can get out into the fresh air and take a walk. And there's, I think you mentioned it earlier, but there's a great article, Harvard Business Review, which says manage your energy, not your time. Yeah. I don't know if you've read that. It's and we'll put it in the show notes. It's a brilliant, and it talks into exactly those things, because you know, we can manage our time to a little bit, but what we can manage and we should own is your word, self-care, which is managing our energy, so we're constantly energized.
Absolutely. And you know, that's really important, because it's not all, you know, middle age isn't all bad news. You know, it's a huge opportunity. If you think about it, you know, what next for me? What do I want to do? How do I want to feel? Where do I want to go? You know, coaching obviously is the perfect partner for all of those questions. But it's, you know, it's there for the taking if we can, you know, get to our optimum, whatever that is.
Yeah. And I guess as a middle-aged woman, even a middle-aged man might come to you as a coaching client and say, oh, I'm reached middle age, and they don't see it as a huge opportunity. So just I guess help our listeners understand what that being middle-aged with that huge opportunity provides, and some of the things that they could think about in a more positive note, rather than, oh, I'm middle-aged.
Yeah. That's a very, very good point, because we all have a slight negativity bias in our thinking. So we're really trying to reframe that, because you could say it's glass half full, isn't it? You know, I'm at my second half of my life, or I've got another half to go, you know.
Yeah.
What do I want to do? And I read a really good book recently written by a life coach. And one of the things it said was about visualizing your 80th birthday. And so you're sat at a table with all your loved ones, and what are they saying about you? And start there.
Yeah. The other question that pops into me, who would be there? Who do I want to be there? You know, so who are the friends and those contacts and those that I haven't identified or haven't met yet? You know, that's a great opportunity. Meet new people, exciting
It's
new
huge.
relationships that could develop.
It's huge. And, you touch on an excellent point. We get to a stage in life where, look, we're all busy. We've just talked about that for the last half an hour. So and your time's your most valuable commodity. Who you give that to is important.
Yeah.
So surrounding yourself with, the right people,
Yeah.
people that bring
And
you joy and energy.
yeah. And certainly the self-care is about being around those people you love, but also being around, if you're that more extroverted and social, being around people to just
Yeah.
interact rather than
Yeah.
becoming isolated and lonely.
And that's dangerous for health. I
Mm,
mean,
mm,
there's plenty of science behind human connection being critical for our well-being.
yeah. So what are the top tips would you provide to your clients or those that are listening to energize themselves, self-care, all those great things that you mentioned? What other things can they take away from this podcast that they can action?
Oh, great question. What top tips would I give? I would think about what would you like to do? I think it's quite simple, really. What would you like to do? What would you like to be remembered for?
So
And
your sort
how
of legacy, what's the legacy that you want
Yeah.
to
And
leave
that
behind?
could
Yeah.
be very, very simple, or that could be something very complex. I mean, it doesn't matter, but it's about just enjoying the journey, I think, as well.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's something, I'm middle-aged, slightly older than yourself, Mia, and we won't go into numbers, as you said, but it's it is. I'm thinking, what is that legacy I want to leave behind? What is the value that I want to provide to society? So yeah, I think it's a great area of focus. And I haven't thought of my 80th birthday. What would I want people to be saying about me, or who I'd like to be there? But it's got me thinking about that as well.
Hmm.
So
It's a nice one, that.
yeah, it's great. Any other top tips that you could offer?
Well, just off the back of that, I would say less looking behind, more looking forward.
Yeah, yeah. Using your term earlier, it's a sandwich, right? So it's about looking forward in the sandwich rather than behind. Rather than saying you're stuck in the middle. It's about developing something, a further vision for those next second half that you've got to go out and play and enjoy.
Exactly.
Yeah, yeah,
And you're wiser. Brilliant.
yeah, yeah. That's very true. Actually, the wisdom you've got.
Mm.
And I see it as a leader, because there will be some leaders listening onto here to say, I've got some experience, some maturity in my leadership. What's the next stage for me as a leader? Not just in my life, but as a leader. And I did a podcast with an amazing gentleman called Trevor Waldock, who talks about eldership.
Mm.
And it's about using that wisdom and that knowledge to then pass on to other leaders.
Yeah,
You know,
absolutely.
and you're talking about passing on the knowledge and creating a better world for your daughter. As
Mm.
leaders, I think we need to create a better world for future leaders. It will
I
be
think,
your daughters and other daughters, my daughters, sons, etc.
yeah,
So it is about thinking about how we can develop, better society, a better world in which our future generations will adopt and live in. So I think there's a lot to it for that as well.
I agree. I think mentorship has a huge role, especially with more experienced leaders. And it has I think there's two ways you could get real advantage out of that, apart from the obvious giving back and imparting of your knowledge and experience. If you are nearing retirement, it's a lovely way to phase down your hours as well and still add real value. So you don't have that cliff edge of one day you're at work and then Monday morning it's all over. That's
Yeah.
not good. So I think there are lots of ways that we can learn from each other always.
So what I'm taking from this conversation, there's an element or a key element from your approach and your philosophy, which is about self-care and looking after oneself and
Yeah.
re-energizing so that you can present your best self in the way that you see that. And part of that is confidence, authenticity, all those good things. There are middle-aged women that you work with that are going through menopause who that creates a even further challenge for midlife and things they're following. And what you're asking organisations to do is make sure they have a policy and put in some very practical steps. But a key part of that is education and engagement around the menopause and some of the challenges that different people will face. And then what I'm hearing here is about looking forward, not always looking back, and planning, but creating a legacy and a way in which you can bring that wisdom, that knowledge to the fore to create a better tomorrow.
Exactly.
Yeah. Which leads nicely to my final question, if I may. Yeah. At Coaching Focus, we have a very simple purpose, which is coaching for a better tomorrow. So in your own words, what does coaching for a better tomorrow mean to you?
I've already been thinking about this because I knew you would ask me. And I've been thinking coaching for a better tomorrow is about living your life well, so in tune with yourself and your values, being well yourself, so self-care and resourcing yourself. And then if you have those things, then doing well for yourself or other people.
Brilliant. And it feels to me that all those three are linked.
Yes.
And wellness is, doing well, being well, are all connected into for a better tomorrow.
Yes. Yeah. And it's contagious.
Yeah. And it's who doesn't want to be well, right? Who doesn't want to be well and do well? So it's a natural sort of focus and approach to be taken, and certainly aligns very well to coaching for a better tomorrow. So Mia, thank you. Thank you for sharing your wisdom and your experience of working with middle-aged women. And it's a real pleasure to have you as a guest today.
Thank you very much for having me.